Kids trusted him. Parents invited him inside. And that is because, on the surface, John Wayne Gacy was the definition of a stand-up guy. Now, imagine you're living in a quiet suburb of Chicago in the 1970s. You've got this neighbor, John. Everyone knows John. He's the guy who throws the best neighborhood block parties. He's a precinct captain for the local Democratic Party, and he runs a successful construction business called PDM Contractors. But what really made him a local celebrity was his alter ego, Pogo the Clown. John would literally dress up in a full clown suit, paint his face, and go to children's hospitals and charity events just to make kids laugh. He was the guy you'd want watching your house while you were on vacation. But here's the thing. John Wayne Gacy was actually a literal monster, hiding in plain sight. And bro was an absolute psychopath. While he was out shaking hands with the mayor and entertaining kids, he was also leading a double life as one of the most prolific serial killers in American history. And the wildest part of the story isn't just what he did, but where he put the evidence. See, Gacy had this nice brick ranch house in Summerdale, and to the neighbors, it looked like a normal home. But underneath that house, in the crawl space, Gacy was hiding a secret that would eventually haunt the entire world. So, the story really starts to get dark when you look at how he chose his victims. Gacy didn't just stalk people in the woods. He used his status as a business owner to lure young men and teenage boys to his house. He would often go to bus stations or see kids walking along the street and offer them a high-paying job at his construction company. These were kids who just wanted to work and make some money, so they'd hop in his car, thinking they were starting a new career. But once they got back to his house, the vibe would change instantly. Gacy had this trick he liked to play. He was obsessed with magic and handcuffs, and he'd tell these young men that he wanted to show them a handcuff trick. He'd put the cuffs on himself first to show them it was safe. Then he'd take them off and ask the victim to try. As soon as the victim clicked those cuffs onto their own wrists, boom, the trap was set. Gacy would then reveal that he had a special key or a secret to the cuffs, and he'd tell them they were trapped. This is where things would turn into a total nightmare. He would saw them for hours, and then he would use a piece of wood or a rope to perform what he called the garrote trick, which is basically a way of strangling someone until they were unalived. And he did this over and over again, for years, right there in his quiet suburban home, while his neighbors were probably just a few feet away watching TV. Now, you're probably wondering, how did nobody notice? Well, here is where it gets even more twisted. Because Gacy was unaliving so many people, he had to figure out what to do with the bodies. And instead of driving them out to the woods like other killers might, he decided to just bury them right under his own feet. He would crawl into the narrow, muddy space under his house, the crawl space, and he would dig shallow graves. He'd throw the bodies in there and cover them with quicklime to try and speed up the decomposition and hide the smell. But eventually, the smell became impossible to ignore. His wife at the time even complained about a foul, rotting odor coming from the vents. And Gacy, being the master manipulator that he was, just looked her in the eye and said, "Oh, it's just a moisture problem." Or, "Some rats must have died in the pipes." He even spent thousands of dollars on plumbing repairs and lime just to cover his tracks. And because he was such a respected member of the community, people actually believed him. They couldn't wrap their heads around the fact that the guy in the clown suit was actually living on top of a literal graveyard. He managed to unalive 33 young men this way, and he believed he was so much smarter than the police that he'd never get caught. But in December of 1978, Gacy finally made the mistake that would end his run. It all started with a 15-year-old boy named Robert Piest. Robert was a good kid who worked at a local pharmacy, and one night, Gacy came into the store to talk to the owner about a construction job. While he was there, he talked to Robert and told him he had a job opening that paid way more than the pharmacy. Robert told his mom he'd be right back, that he was just going to talk to a contractor in the parking lot, and then he vanished. When Robert didn't come home, his mom went straight to the police, and luckily Robert had mentioned the name of the contractor. When the police looked up John Wayne Gacy, they found out he had a previous record from years ago in Iowa for similar activities, and they immediately got suspicious. They started 24-hour surveillance on him, and Gacy, being the arrogant psychopath he was, actually invited the officers into his house for coffee. He was literally mocking them, thinking he was untouchable. But while the officers were in his house, they noticed two things. First, the smell was absolutely putrid. It smelled like death. Second, they noticed that Gacy was acting super weird and twitchy. So, the police got a search warrant. And when they entered that house with the intent to find Robert Piest, they didn't just find evidence of a kidnapping. they found a house of horrors. One of the investigators noticed that the heat in the house was turned up way too high, which was making the smell of decomposition even worse. They went into the kitchen and saw a trapdoor leading to the crawl space. When they opened it and shone a flashlight down there, they saw human bones sticking out of the mud. Boom! The game was over. The investigators had to put on protective suits and spend weeks crawling through the filth under Gacy's house, hand-digging through the dirt. They ended up finding 27 bodies buried in that crawl space, packed together like cordwood. They found another few bodies buried in different parts of the yard, and Gacy eventually confessed that he had thrown the last few victims, including Robert Peist, into the nearby Des Plaines River because he simply ran out of room under his house. Think about that for a second. He had so many victims that his own private cemetery was full. During the trial, Gacy tried to plead insanity, claiming that he had multiple personalities and that a bad version of him was the one who did the unaliving. But the jury wasn't buying it. They saw him for what he was, a calculated, cold-blooded killer who knew exactly what he was doing every time he put on those handcuffs. He was found guilty of 33 murders, which at the time was the most by any single person in US history. While he was on death row for 14 years, he didn't show a single ounce of remorse. In fact, he spent his time painting pictures of clowns, specifically Pogo the Clown, and selling them to people who were obsessed with true crime. It was like he was still mocking the world from behind bars. Finally, in 1994, he was executed by lethal injection, and his last words were just as arrogant as his life. He basically told the guards to kiss his. You know what? To this day, the image of the killer clown remains one of the most terrifying symbols of how you never truly know who your neighbors are.